Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder. And today we're going to talk about the rise of big business in the late 1800s. Learning targets, we'll talk about different management innovations that businesses used during the late 1800s. We'll talk about the public debate over whether these people were robber barons or captains of industry. And we'll explain about how the government took steps to block these abuses of power. So, a new type of business emerges in the late 1800s, and that's called a corporation. Before this, the business could only expand as far as the family could take it, but the family would take on a lot of liability if something went wrong. Here, with a corporation, a number of people share ownership in a company. So, if I were to start up my own undergarment company, Snides, Tidies, Whiteys, I would have let's say I'd have to put up $5,000 by myself, or maybe, let's say 25,000. But if each of you were to go into business with me, we would all share liability, which means we would all be liable a little bit instead of me being liable by myself for anything that went wrong. And we'd each only have to put up $1,000 to get the same thing as me putting up 25,000 myself. So it creates a large company with lots of money to spend, and it makes them able to sell larger amounts of goods. And here you can see somebody's map of the most famous companies from each state. You can see Indiana's is Cummins, I believe is how you pronounce it, and they make basically large diesel engines. It's a machinery company. Different corporation practices. I tried to put them all on one slide for you so that it's not as difficult to follow through. But the trust basically is when the companies assign stock to a board of trustees. And this is to get around the fact that laws back then, you couldn't own the stock of another company. So we would assign the stock of another company to a board of trustees along with our stock, and we combine those stocks into a new company, and we pay ourselves with dividends, or basically profits from those stocks. A monopoly is what happens when there's one seller of a product. Basically, there's no true monopoly anymore, but we consider it a monopoly if you have over 90% of the market. So if a company in any given market has over 90%, they're considered a monopoly, which means that they are the only ones that sell that product. They can essentially choose the price that they want to sell it at, and you have to pay it because they're the only seller. What's the goal of the board game Monopoly, if any of you have ever heard of that or played that? It's to get all the properties. A cartel is a group of businesses that gather together and basically agree to limit production of that product that they all make, and this keeps prices high for everybody. And then we have horizontal versus vertical integration, and you're going to have to know the differences between these two. Horizontal integration is basically buying out your competition or merging with other companies to create a gigantic company with more means of production, which means you can lower costs. A vertical integration is when you gain control of all of the aspects of a product's creation. So if I were creating Snides Whiteys undergarment company, I would have the cotton producers. I would have the trucks or railroads to deliver the product. I would have the factories to make the product. I would control every aspect of the product's creation, because if those all belong to someone else, they're all trying to make a profit, which means the price is always a little bit higher. I don't need to make a profit off of every aspect of the creation, so it allows me to lower the product's price. I mean, here is an example of John D. Rockefeller and the oil, or Standard Oil Company. He bought out 6 rival companies, and basically Standard Oil, the largest company back then. Modern companies that are horizontally integrated are United Airlines, Hewlett Packard, and Bank of America. And the vertical integration would be Rockefeller purchasing oil wells and pipelines, tank cars on railroads, and retail outlets to sell the oil. and basically they control the prices and the supply at that point. Modern companies that are vertically integrated are Amazon, Virgin Atlantic, and Apple. And we mentioned John D. Rockefeller, and he's the oil tycoon of back then. He's the owner of Standard Oil, which was a monopoly in the oil industry. And many of his business practices are still used today, like we mentioned, horizontal and vertical integration. Andrew Carnegie was a steel tycoon. He's a dedicated philanthropist, which is somebody who gives back to charities and whatnot. He builds more than 2,000 libraries because remember back then an education was the best way to move up in life, and to get books you had to go to the library. And he basically gave away over $350 million of his fortune. That would be $8.2 billion in today's money. Now we talk about evolution in science and psychology, but basically taking the theory of evolution and natural selection and applying it to society is what we call social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is the idea that only the fittest businesses were meant to survive. And so any practice that kills off another business is good. That business was not meant to make it. People who believed in social Darwinism thought that wealth was a measure of one's value to society, and only the ones who were the wealthiest should survive. This is used to justify discrimination between classes, racism, poverty, and laissez-faire government policies that were conducted back then. Now, what should we think of these business leaders? Are they good or are they bad? People who thought they were bad called these leaders robber barons. We feel that these monopolies, trusts, and cartels give an unfair advantage to these businessmen. The small mom and pop businesses are squeezed out. The public is hurt by higher prices. And basically, I'm not sure what that's supposed to say there. People who looked at these people thought that they were taking advantage of the American public, the working class, in order to build their fortunes. And some people looked at these people as captains of industry, like Andrew Carnegie. They're philanthropists that give back their fortune. They create jobs in America. They should have some sort of advantage because they provide jobs to these people that need it. So they help America prosper, and they're captains of industry. So you got to know the difference between those two things. And basically, starting in the late 1880s, the government steps in to halt these unjust business practices, especially in the railroad industry. Basically, we start regulating business. So we're not laissez-faire anymore. We're going to start having some hands-on. And that would be the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC. Think of that, interstate commerce. And this is that's what the federal government has the power to oversee, is trade that goes between states on railroads. So if these railroads go between states, basically the government can oversee it and regulate it. It cannot make laws, but it only monitors the railroads between states and makes sure that laws are not being broken. And then in 1890, we have a very important piece of legislation for later on called the Sherman Antitrust Act. And remember, a trust is gaining multiple companies trying to become a monopoly, but it outlaws any trust that operates in restraint of trade. And so if you're trying to squeeze out other businesses on purpose, illegally, then that is not okay, and the government will stop it. It's not used effectively throughout the 1890s because courts always rule in favor of the businesses. And so it's not used effectively until President Roosevelt becomes a trust buster in 1901. He'll start using it during the Progressive Era, which we'll talk about very soon. And he will basically stop all of these businesses from becoming monopolies and taking advantage of the American public. That's all I have for you today. If you would like to write down or note any questions that you have, bring those back into class, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.